Right, good morning everybody. Thanks very much for coming. I'm Pete Leeson and I've been working for the Woodland Trust for nearly 30 years. I trained originally as a charter surveyor and started working first in Norfolk, then went down to London and finally landed up in Manchester before moving to Cumbria in 1993. City life did not suit a Suffolk lad who was brought up on a small holding valuing vegetables and wildlife and flowers. So I now work for the Woodland Trust, and that's where I've spent nearly 30 years. Woodland Trust is the major woodland-focused charity in the UK, with staff across England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And I started my life at the Trust as a surveyor, buying land and woodland for our conservation effort. But I moved to my current role in 2008, and since then I've been working primarily with the farmed landscape to try and get trees onto farms and working directly with farmers. Our organisational focus is on woodland restoration, management and creation. However, a very small number of staff like myself have a wider remit, still based on trees, but looking at how they can benefit land management outside of woods and particularly on farms and common land in the UK. And you may be surprised to learn that 50% of the canopy of trees in the UK is not in woods. And unfortunately, that 50% is the most easily lost, and it's the area we're losing most trees at the moment. So I'm trying to work on that 50%. And it probably won't also surprise you to learn that most of our farmland trees are in a category described as middle-aged or old. We just haven't been planting young trees. Also, the vast majority of our hedges are considered to be poorly managed, and for decades we've not been planting trees or hedgerows and managing them properly. Don't take this as a criticism if you're a farmer, because I'm not blaming anyone here. Public policy and funding has not supported these actions, but it has supported productivity. And very often we've lost hedgerows and trees to make fields bigger in a perceived benefit for productivity. But we also have seen an increase in climate change, floods, heavy rainfall, and we now believe that trees and hedgerows can help with resolving some of those issues. And don't just listen to me on that one. In the last 15 years, we've seen a storm of studies about all aspects of how we manage land and vegetation and animals on that land. Whichever camp you're in, you cannot have failed to notice growing concern about climate change, loss of biodiversity, and the human health aspects of poor food. I say a storm of studies. On one count alone, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, in its reporting refers to 255,000 peer-reviewed papers. It's a lot of evidence gathering. So without getting bogged down in the minutiae of the science, just where are we with trees and hedges on farms? And what do I do in this area? Well, I want a combination of things. Functioning, productive, financially stable farms with better water quality, animal health and wildlife. Functioning landscapes that minimise flood risks and drought conditions through good land management. And a return to healthy, nutrient-rich foods supported from the farm to the consumer. I think these are all possible outcomes where thinking about how and where you manage trees and hedges on your farm can add a major contribution. For the purposes of this talk, I won't really talk about wildlife other than to say that we will get more insects, birds and mammals back if we create habitats for them. Simply allowing tall grasses, planting and maintaining hedgerows, planting woodland corners will give us some nature. Creating riparian strips will keep sediment and fertility out of watercourses and improve water quality. Allowing trees to die and not cutting them up and removing the deadwood will also provide habitat for bats, birds and beetles. Every farm can do some of this. But what can trees and hedges do for you? And I'll look at some of the major areas. A really exciting area which has become more recognised in the UK in the last few years has been what we call agroforestry. And we now have that term regenerative agriculture too. The agroforesters are using trees in very many ways, and the regen guys also have their take on this too. So I've seen agroforestry work in Africa, where coffee plantations use mixed cropping or forestry trees to create the right humidity and shade conditions for the coffee plant. With climate change, this approach is becoming more and more common, and there's lots of advice in Africa and other areas to provide this kind of approach. In this country, we're also now increasingly seeing lowland farms adopting agroforestry approaches. Archie on the Spain's Hall estate in Essex is using trees in an arable setting, as is Stephen Briggs in Cambridgeshire. Both live in zones where soils have been hard pushed by agriculture and where rainfall is now less reliable. Their trees help break up soil pan created by years of ploughing and create better soil moisture content. Leaf fall encourages more worms and soil biodiversity, which supports crops. Rows of trees can stop or reduce crop transpiration rates, helping with moisture retention in dry spells. So just as more people are looking at herbal leys and broader range of grasses and herbs for animal health, many of the folks I work with in the regenerative sphere are also using what we might term agroforestry techniques for animals. And perhaps the most relevant of these features of trees and hedges include shade, so from sun and poor conditions, shelter from heavy rain and wind, grass seasonality, so along hedges and edges and fields you get better grass growth with hedges and trees, and browse, allowing animals to browse along hedges or copses of specific trees can provide some real health benefits. The multi-land study at Bangor concluded that animals using shelter and shade in fields, getting away from hot sun or cold winds and rain, reduced the loss of energy by 10 to 15%. And we know that shelter for lambs in cold conditions improves survival rates. Research papers are also showing that leaf content of micronutrients can be higher or better than grasses or herbs in hedges or trees. Manganese, copper, boron, zinc, calcium, etc. are all present in leaves, albeit in varying amounts. Willow contains salicylic acid and selenium, and willows are often target for browsing by cattle. Tannins can be a double-edged sword, but can help as an anti-parasitic and antimicrobial agent. Ted Green in the Royal Parks has been doing research into tree hay, the cutting and drying of branches and leaves that can be fed to animals in winter. It seems this is a practice for at least a millennia, except it's now gone out of favour in modern agriculture. Closer to home, I've had multiple conversations with folks who observe their cattle spending time browsing tree leaves, and if left alone, they appear to self-medicate with leaves at different times of year. And add to this, Jamie Elizondo, a Mexican farmer and research, has shown that cows improve their utilisation of fodder when they're allowed a proportion of fibre in their diet. Fibre is often missing in single species grass leys and leads to scouring, but can be brought back with trees and hedges. So, how we manage our cattle, their ability to use grasses is improved by having more fibre in the diet. And the Pontben experiment in Wales shows how seasonality in grasses is improved closer to shelter belts. The increased humidity around the hedge in summer and the relative warmth in winter created longer grass season in the field. In addition, species like alder are naturally nitrogen fixing, which can support nearby grasses. Turning to water quality, there's increased action and interest in water quality. We've all seen in the public eye how our UU and others have been blamed for sewage in watercourses. And unfortunately, it's also the truth that agriculture produces some of that water quality issue. So there's multiple sources of pollution in watercourses, and whether we like it or not, agriculture is one of those sources. But if we turn that on its head, if fertility is leaving the farm and going to a watercourse, then you're losing that fertility from the farm. Would it not be better to keep the fertility on the farm? Fertiliser that's put on one field one day and runs off the next is money down the drain. Poor soils are often the cause of loss of fertility from farms into watercourses. If you have major problems with soils, then you could probably get some help with soils first before you start thinking about anything else. But trees and hedges can also help. Hedges, if well maintained, are brilliant at capturing runoff from fields. Loose or compacted soils can often be sources of sediment flows into watercourses, and sediment which is often laden with fertility. Planting a hedge on a contour in a field or a strip of woodland along a stream can massively reduce diffuse pollution and keep fertility in the field. If it adds to browse and fodder for cattle, all to the good. Diffuse pollution can significantly be reduced along watercourses by fencing narrow strips and planting with trees. If you use willows in those strips, then once they're established, they'll provide high value fodder. If you think you've got a water quality issue or wish to gain advice on retaining fertility on the farm and in your soils, it's really worth talking to Natural England catchment sensitive farming officers. They can help with grant aid solutions and some advice on farm. Another area where trees and hedges can help is water volume. People often ask me if trees will stop flooding, and I've got asked this a lot after Desmond. And the full answer is yes and no. In reality, volumes like we saw in Desmond are probably unstoppable. Whatever we do, they're literally off the scale. But the Desmond-style flood is a rarity for now at least. More likely are the short, sharp shower, flash floods, or those where moderate rain accumulates over a number of days. And in these scenarios, we think that trees, scrub and vegetation can have a significant effect. They flatten out peak flows in floods. So not reducing the overall amount of water by very much, but acting to spread out the peak of floods is a significant benefit for landowners and land managers. It's often the peak of a flood that causes the most damage. So we studied trees and woods around Cumbria with Nick Chappell of Lancaster University to see what effect they had on extreme water events. His findings are quite technical, but after 3 years of research, both directly from these sites and literature reviews as well, it appears that trees planted in the uplands or at appropriate points and locations can reduce flooding. And they can also moderate flows in droughts. And that's the other key thing about our weather change. We're not just flooding these days, we're also having droughts. In other words, trees and hedges can bring back balance to a catchment. The catchment could be the size of the Eden, or it could be a tiny beck that flows through the yard at home. Closer to home on the farm, the physical properties of shade, shelter and roots with trees and hedges can lead to better field drainage and water management. It's this balancing of water that trees and hedges can deliver. Oh, losing control. So yes, trees use a lot of water when they transpire, but deeper rooting opens soil pores, allowing water to enter the soil at depth and allowing the replenishment of water deep down in the soil. Hedges are particularly good at blocking water pathways and returning water to the ground. Finally, trees can also intercept rainfall and re-evaporate it. The process is called wet canopy evaporation and can reduce the amount of water actually hitting the ground between 10 and 30%, depending on wind and relative humidity. So farm woods can bring big changes to water farm balances. As with all things, whilst I'm a firm advocate of more hedges and trees on your farm, you need to be able to manage these assets. It's very easy to put new fences into the landscape and trees behind them, but I would urge good design and think hard about management and how you're going to do that. One of my favourite things is hedge laying, but if you are time poor, the tractor-mounted flail seems like the answer. If you can bring yourself to create a hedge rotation on the farm, where some hedges are laid and some are let to grow out, you can reduce the annual workload creating a yearly cycle of work over a number of years. For nature, untidy is good, and we're often way too tidy on farms, and I can see some of the audience smiling about that. A box-shaped hedge with a flat top allows more predation.
Peter Fox, you want it?
Here's Pete Fox, where is he? A box-shaped hedge with a flat top allows more predation of small birds than one managed to a point and higgledy-piggledy on the top. The key food sources for bees and other pollinators and local migratory birds are often the spring flowers and autumn berries we find on hawthorn and rowan. But the flowers and berries only come on second-year growth on hawthorn, so please allow some of your hedges to grow for 2 or 3 years before cutting. That will allow you to have flowering, more pollinators and also more food for birds. Perhaps the best thing we could do would be have a planting program over many years, plant fewer trees per year, but plant them every year. In this way, you can see where they work well and learn from the experience. They're an increasing body of folks who can help you with a lot. They're an increasing body of folks who can help you with a lot of accessible information too. So, bringing it home. I think there are some really good reasons why we should have more trees and hedges on farms, many of which will benefit you as a farmer, your stock and your soils too. And if we do create new hedges and plant new trees, we will automatically have more wildlife. Thanks for listening.